Good evening, everyone. I'm Jason Johnson, in tonight for Joy Reid. We've got a lot of news to get to, including the latest on the investigation into the January 6th insurrection. There's some stunning new comments from the former top prosecutor on the case. But we have to start with breaking news out of Boulder, Colorado, where authorities and emergency crews have been responding to an active shooter at a local supermarket. Boulder police first notified the public that there was an active shooter situation around 2:30 local time. An eyewitness live streamed the event on YouTube. The video shows what appears to be several shooting victims and police arriving on the scene with guns drawn. NBC is reporting that a shirtless man with blood running down his leg was escorted out of the store in handcuffs. It is not clear if the man was a suspect. Colorado Governor Jared Polis has tweeted that he is monitoring the situation. Meanwhile, the DOJ appears ready to drop the hammer on the insurrectionists who led the siege of the U.S. Capitol. Some of the worst aggressors in the January 6th attack could soon be facing new indictments for sedition, one of the rarest and most stigmatizing criminal charges the prosecutors can bring. That's according to the former acting U.S. attorney for Washington, D.C., Michael Sherwin, the Trump appointee who led the investigation until earlier this month. In a 60 Minutes interview last night, he said the growing body of evidence will support sedition charges.
I personally believe the evidence is trending towards that and probably meets those elements.
Do you anticipate sedition charges against some of these suspects?
I believe the facts do support those charges, and I think that as we go forward, more facts will support that.
This comes after the Department of Justice on Friday unsealed new conspiracy charges against members of the far-right extremist group, the Proud Boys, who were at the forefront of the siege. The indictment reveals how their attack was premeditated and coordinated through an encrypted messaging app. Not only that, but the messages appear to show they readily embraced the conspiracy theory that Joe Biden stole the 2020 election. That's the big lie that former President Donald Trump amplified in the months leading up to the January 6th attack. And according to Sherwin, his role, former president's role in the attack, is still under scrutiny.
Has the role of former President Trump been part of your investigation?
It's unequivocal that Trump was the magnet that brought the people to D.C. on the 6th. Now the question is he criminally culpable for everything that happened during the siege, during the breach?
In short, you have investigators looking into the president's role.
We have people looking at everything, correct. Everything's being looked at.
Sherwin said there are now over 400 criminal cases before the courts. That includes the 2 defendants arrested last week for using an unknown chemical spray to assault Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick, who later died from his injuries. Sherwin confirmed that we could see murder charges pending a report from the medical examiner. Joining me now is MSNBC.
If evidence directly relates that chemical to his death, yeah, we have causation, we have a link. Yes, in that scenario, correct. That's a murder case.
Joining me now is MSNBC counterterrorism and intelligence analyst Malcolm Nance. Paul Butler is a former federal prosecutor, and Rosa Brooks is a former Defense Department official and author of Tangled Up in Blue, Policing the American City. Thank you all so much for joining me this evening. I'm going to start with you, Paul. First off, just to explain to the laymen and laywomen out there, what is sedition and why is that charge so significant in the wake of this insurrection?
Sedition is using violence to oppose the government or to prevent the law from being carried out. So it's, for example, using violence to prevent the certification of the election. It would be a high-profile charge that would carry a lot of symbolism. Some of the other charges have been obstruction of government property or damage or trespass. To a lot of people, that doesn't really fit the crime. So sedition says that what these folks tried to do was to overturn the government. It's a rare case. There has been one federal prosecution for sedition in the last 10 years, back in 2010, and that charge was unsuccessful. The prosecutors lost that case.
So I just want to follow up really quickly. For the regular person, what's the difference between sedition and treason? Or is there much of a difference legally?
So treason is a crime that's named in the Constitution that's aiding and abetting the enemy. Sedition is about people who, on their own will, in this case, American citizens, want to overthrow the government. In a sense, it's like a criminal law version of treason, but it doesn't require cooperating with or aiding and abetting enemies. In this case, the people who are charged are essentially enemies of the United States themselves.
So, Rosa, we have some audio here. We talk about the idea of overthrowing the government. You had a lot of people who were part of this insurrection, part of this attack, who consider themselves Blue Lives Matter, and yet they engaged in violence against police officers. I want to listen to this audio and get some of your commentary on the other side.
We're not here for you. We're here for America.
The Capitol Police Force requests backup. These internal radio communications are from the reinforcements, officers from D.C.'s Municipal Police Force, or MPD, who were called in to help the Capitol Police.
Cruiser 50, 64, 54, mount up.
Police escalate their response and start using more crowd control weapons.
They're shooting into their own people. We represent Blue Lives, and this is what they do to us.
Multiple deployments from the Capitol MPD. One state board deployment on crime to hold the line. Cruiser 50 has flanked 1033. I repeat, 1033 west front of the Capitol. We have been flanked and we've lost the line.
Rosa, we've talked for months since this attack about the fact that you have some police force members who seem to be sort of empathetic to the attackers, that some of the people who attacked the Capitol are in police departments. When you hear this kind of video, is this the kind of thing that's going to be helpful in a prosecution when you see these people sort of admitting that they're engaging in violence and we're doing this for you? Or does it kind of muddy the waters between who the attackers are and who the supporters might be?
No, I think it helps the prosecution. I mean, listening to that audio, seeing that footage, it's shocking. And it makes it very clear this wasn't just a bunch of protesters who were pro-Trump. This was a mob of people using violence to take over the Capitol. And, you know, I've actually always been very leery of using the word sedition, talking about things like treason or sedition, because historically in the United States, those terms have often been used against minorities, against immigrants, against people on the left who were dissenters and criticized the U.S. government. But if ever there was a situation that sort of cried out for the use of that symbolically very powerful term, this is it. This was a violent insurrection, and there's really no other word for it.
Now, I don't have any other word for it other than violent insurrection, but apparently Senator Ron Johnson does. We have a senator who's been saying for days now in various environments that, well, he didn't necessarily feel threatened and he doesn't necessarily see why this is a problem. And Malcolm, I want to ask you, when you have members of Congress coming forward and saying, well, I didn't feel threatened, or the threats was only in this part of the building and not for me because I thought these are law-abiding citizens, does that give you more or less confidence that we could ever get a real investigation at the congressional level into what happened that day?
Well, certainly not from Senator Ron Johnson. I mean, let's just be straight up and frank. He's a liar. We saw the video with our own eyes of him actually, not him, but the insurrectionists going right into the Senate chambers, going through the notes of his fellow senators, standing on the dais, saying that they were looking for, information that would get something on them, bringing, wrist ties and flex cuffs into the Senate chamber themselves, and the vice president being within 100 feet of these insurrectionists. I mean, what's going on here is Ron Johnson has decided he is going to be the executor of Donald Trump's big lie. And they are desperate to cover for the violent actions of their supporters. He's also pushing that, Antifa and other people were in there doing that. Look, I monitored their communications in real time. I watched their video streams in real time before the speech had ended, and they were already fighting on the western wing of the Capitol building with some ferocity. I had 6 different researchers watching them penetrate the building. And for them to suddenly go and say, it wasn't our people, we didn't do it, I didn't feel any threat because, you know, they were essentially non-black people, non-Antifa people, is just pandering to people who are literally carried out crimes. And, you know, I don't know if he actually believes this or if he just thinks that, you know, he's going to get reelected by pushing the Trump party line. But it shows you can't trust that man. You can't trust a word out of his mouth.
Yeah, you know, if I was saying that I felt safe at a Klan rally, it doesn't mean that the Klan is safe. You know, Paul, I want to bring this back because as we've begun these investigations, one of the concerns I've had is that you're already seeing plea deals. You're already seeing examples where people are playing out or pleading to lesser charges. To me, an insurrection is an insurrection, right? There's no such thing as a little bit pregnant, a little bit murder, a little bit insurrection. Why have we already seen early plea deals? And is that to catch bigger fish down the road, or is it because the government doesn't necessarily think they have a strong case against some of these people?
Yeah, so part of the reason could be to get people to cooperate with the government, to turn in people who have more involvement and more culpability. So in the insurrection, we had some people who essentially trespassed. They entered the Capitol, but they didn't try to harm officers or commit any acts of violence or property destruction. And then we have other folks like these 4 Proud Boy leaders who were indicted last week who engaged in advanced planning, deliberations, concealment, and we have other folks who were very likely involved in the murder of Officer Brian Sicknick. And so there should be a range of charges that fit the appropriate criminality. And I think that's what prosecutors are doing. They're hoping that some people will cooperate to help them find the people who were the leaders and planners of the insurrection.
And Rosa, again, we had a large number of people who were involved in this insurrection who were either current or former law enforcement officers. And while we're focusing on what happened in D.C., a lot of these people went back home. They went to their home states. They're now back to the police departments that they were in before. Is there a national movement, or shouldn't we be having a discussion about what we can do to purge these kinds of people or these attitudes from local police departments? And what would that look like if we could do it?
Jason, I think this is a huge wake-up call. I mean, this is something that we've had groups like the Southern Poverty Law Center have been warning for a long time now, that some of these far-right extremist white nationalist groups have been actively trying to recruit from within law enforcement and have been actively trying to encourage their members who are not in law enforcement to join, precisely in order to essentially subvert it from within. And what we don't know is exactly the extent of the problem. We don't know if this is a problem for 1%, 0.1%, 10%, 40%. But I think this makes it really clear that it's incredibly urgent that we find out. You know, I think the problem, as you know, is that policing in this country is completely decentralized. It's state level, municipal level, federal, a zillion different agencies. And we've got some police chiefs and some sheriffs who probably, if they're not active members, may be sympathetic to some of these groups. So I think it's going to be a long haul to identify those people and get them out of law enforcement. I think the federal government is going to have to play a leading role because we can't always assume that local law enforcement will be as enthusiastic as they ought to be, but we've got to do it.
I want to end with this. Malcolm, we've talked about this on our podcast. We've talked about this before on the air of what kind of changes security-wise might be necessary in Congress going forward. There's a debate right now in D.C. Should we be taking down these gates? What changes do you want to see in Congress after this as far as security goes, even as we continue to investigate some of these people who attack? What should we be doing differently in the Capitol building now?
Well, certainly the physical security within the Capitol building is going to have to be beefed up. You know, they're going to have to install blast doors around the structure, so, you know, doors that can be shut completely, which they should have had anyway. I mean, it's a counterterrorism measure there. They're going to have to also have a rapid response force that is completely and wholly independent of Metropolitan Police Department and Capitol Hill Police. Maybe the Marines at 8th and I will have a, you know, much more rapid response capability. The D.C. Guard may have to have ready teams or equipment standing by with, you know, 30, 1 hour or one day notice. in order to mobilize for these things. But the Capitol is probably going to have a permanent fence around it that will be a closer perimeter than what's there right now. But, you know, my beloved late wife was part of the Planning Commission after 9/11, and she was architect of Washington, D.C., and she had recommended a, you know, palace fence that was beautiful, like Buckingham Palace, around the entire Capitol perimeter. And it wasn't implemented, and now we could see where that may have been necessary.
Thank you so much, Malcolm Nance and Rosa Brooks. Paul Butler will be back with me later. Thank you all so much. We're continuing to follow tonight's breaking news. Police responded to an active shooter at a grocery store in Boulder, Colorado. And up next, the growing number of unaccompanied children at the southern border. We have new images from inside one of the border overflow facilities. Plus, a state of emergency in Miami Beach after spring breakers, egged on by Governor DeSantis, flood into the city amid the pandemic. The mayor of Miami Beach joins me live. The readout continues after this. We are standing by for a press briefing by the Boulder Police any minute to update on the shooting at a local grocery store. Back with me is Jim Kavanaugh, former ATF special agent, and joining me now is Ari Melber, MSNBC chief legal correspondent and host of The Beat. I want to start with you, Ari, because this is always the first question that comes to mind when we have these kind of terrible shootings. What is the sort of status of gun laws in the state of Colorado? Do they have a lot of loopholes? Is it you can buy a gun and shoot it the same day? What might be the circumstances that allowed this shooter to get access to their gun in that state?
Well, I'll say Jim, as the ATF expert, I think can also give us insight on that. So happy to tag team that. I mean, this story first broke on MSNBC, at least in our live coverage, as you know, Jason, just within the last hour. And we're looking at some of this footage that's been cleared from ZFG, and our standards has cleared this, although we've been careful, and I know you've been mentioning that there's much we don't know at this point. The footage we also have of an individual leaving the scene may or may not be confirmed as a suspect. I think what we would expect in the upcoming press conference is really a briefing on what they can say about the safety and security of the situation, what people should know in that neighborhood, if and whether they're seeking additional information, be that about the individual or individuals that they think they have apprehended or other background information. The overhead shots that we've seen, and Jim and I were reporting this out last hour, do suggest some level of security and the scene being eventually under control. And I don't believe I know, and I'll defer to Jim as well, on what, if anything, we can say about the firearms situation based on what the authorities have said. We hope to learn more, of course, at this briefing.
Right. And Jim, are you aware of, you know, would you consider Colorado, to your knowledge, to be a state where access to guns is relatively easy? Is it perhaps more challenging? Do you know anything about that? And again, the role that may or may not play when we have mass shootings?
Yeah, usually the western states, and, you know, I'm not know every specific bit about Colorado's law, but normally the western states are pretty easy, open carry, you know, permitless carry. They may require a concealed, you know, permit to carry concealed. But as far as acquiring a firearm, you know, anybody who's 18 can buy a rifle. Colorado's not prohibiting that, and that's federal law. And most of the states allow that in the West. And handguns can be purchased from dealers if you're 21. And generally, they're not illegal to possess. Now, the reports from the news, other news in the local news, but not NBC confirmed, was that there was an AR-15 rifle and some body armor. I already had a witness on that had, the witness said 2 dead outside, or I'm sorry, 2 people down. That's not dead. 2 people down outside and 1 person down inside that were apparently wounded. So there's some victims apparently. We don't know the extent of it. There was a man walked out. Ari had the video, but we don't know. See, when you get into these things, what happens is anybody who comes out can say, I'm just a witness, I'm just a victim, and they could very well be involved. And so often they are just a witness. Police will handcuff them. It's routine. They're taken in, they're questioned, they're identified while the sweep's going on, and then they're just released if they're just a witness. So we don't know who that man was. We do know all the SWAT teams were there. I saw 3 different SWAT teams. They had their Bearcat vehicles. They moved up with a portable armored unit, a man-walk armored unit up to get up there with their long rifles. So there might have been some negotiation attempt. There's the video that Ari showed earlier of the man being walked. He's just wearing a pair of shorts. So we don't know exactly who he is, and Boulder police publicly hasn't said so far that we know if they suspect him or if he's just a witness they're checking out. And he goes in an ambulance. So it could be either way. I mean, even a wounded shooter still gets medical attention, goes to an ambulance, or he could be just a victim who was shot and they don't know his identity. So it's going to be a long, night in Boulder because there's a lot of answers. People there are going to be under tremendous anxiety until the police chief and the sheriff can get out and tell them what's going on directly. And hopefully they will at this press conference. Tell them what they know, be specific. And not just, Jason, and you know this being a professor, that, information like it's an isolated incident is not just good. You got to be more specific than that. You got to really tell who you have in custody, what firearms you have, what areas you've searched, what other allegations are afoot. Sometimes at these things you get reports of multiple shooters. I've never been to one where there wasn't reports of multiple shooters. There always is that. And we've always swept for multiple shooters, but, usually you don't have that. It's just witnesses seeing and hearing different things.
We'd now like to bring in NBC's Gotti Schwartz. Gotti, can we... All right, we've got you on here. Great. I just wanted to ask, what are some of the other things that we've picked up on the ground? What are some of the concerns that people have had? Have we heard additional rumors about other shooters, or is right now people just sort of calm and waiting for what this presser is going to present us?
Yeah, I think right now a lot of people are just waiting for that presser, and we have seen a lot of unconfirmed rumors that have been swirling on social media. In fact, just a little while ago, the police department in Boulder put out a statement saying that there are these rumors swirling. Many of them are untrue. So right now, we're going to completely hold off on any type of speculation until that press conference starts in about 10 minutes with some concrete information. What I can tell you, though, is we've been monitoring this from a live stream that went up just a few minutes after that shooting. So we have seen with our own eyes through this live stream some of those moments right after that shooting happened and during this shooting as well. It appears as though that live stream was started by a man who said he was a journalist and he was headed into that store, and all of a sudden he started to hear some shots. So that video shows a lot of things that we are not going to be showing on television, but what we can tell you from reviewing that video and seeing it play out live is that there were several bodies. There was a body in the parking lot that appeared to be face down. There was a body in the entryway of that supermarket, and then there was a body inside of the supermarket. At this point, it is unclear if they may have survived, what the extent of their injuries were, but that live streamer had come across them basically as he was broadcasting to tens of thousands of people. And so we saw that play out. Then all of a sudden he pulls back, starts taking cover as you hear the sounds of shots being fired. And that continues on for about 10, 15 minutes, shots fired. And then you finally see police descend on that King Super. And that's what you're seeing in that video there. Those officers swarming the building, and many of them going onto the roof. So you had officers in all directions that were basically surrounding the building. They started to tell whoever was inside that they were surrounding the building to come out with their hands up. And you saw them on the roof. Then you saw what appeared to be officers somehow descend into the store. And then things took a turn where you saw a man that was led out in handcuffs, and he had been stripped down to, or possibly removed his clothing himself, but he was not wearing a shirt, he was not wearing pants, he appeared to have just been wearing boxers, and he had some sort of injury on his leg, and he was dripping blood as they took him from that store. Now at this point, again, he was in cuffs, but it is unclear as though whether or not he was a suspect in this shooting. All of it was developing. In fact, that's the video that you see right there. That's the man being led over to a police car. And again, unclear if he is the suspect, but after that, things started to relax a little bit at the scene, and then we started to see people led out of that building, but still no word whether the actual gunman is in custody at this moment. Back to you.
So I want to focus on that image, Ari, that you had earlier on your show. you know, when this press conference happens, obviously the police have to be very careful. They have to be very careful with their legal language. What is some of the language that they're going to have to be very careful with? Because the public sees a guy being walked out of a building in handcuffs with blood going down his leg. But obviously that person can't be, I mean, we don't know if that person is a suspect. We don't know what they've done. What's the kind of language that we'll hear in a press conference as the police try to stay within the confines of the law, but also tell the public that this is being handled and being investigated properly?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jason, and this is an incident of interest, obviously, in Boulder, Colorado, and around the nation. When you look at something like this with what we've learned about it, you can expect the police to first speak in terms of the action report. That is, before you get to the phase of whether and how other authorities or prosecutors would charge a case, the police will say what they think they found without compromising the investigation, whether they think they have identified a suspect, whether they say they've secured the area, or who they've detained. So whether or not that comes with identifying information, if they are in a position to give this briefing, which they are, they're running a few minutes behind, but we expect it momentarily, we would expect them to be able to say things about if and who they apprehended anyone, the number of victims, or possibly, and we're not reporting this, but possibly the number of victims or deceased in the situation. Right. Those are the kind of things that they should say, as well as always, and Jim and I were discussing this earlier in our coverage, whether they're seeking assistance from the community for any aspect of this, whether that's further information about people they've identified, or just anything that people may know in what led up to this, or anything else in the neighborhood afterward. This was, as described, an active shooter scene, certainly harrowing. Certainly a lot of law enforcement police got there. The footage we're looking at now for viewers is both an eye on where we expect this outdoor press conference to commence, and some of that footage that's been cleared by standards of outside the scene in Boulder, Colorado. So we would expect them to at least have the bare bones of that portrait to share, both with the community and those interested around the nation following this tonight.
And Gotti, I want to, when we talk about the community as a whole, paint us a little bit of a picture. What kind of neighborhood is this in Boulder? Is this sort of near the center of the city? I mean, we're seeing this sort of sky drone view, and I can't quite tell what grocery store this is, but is this a busy part of town? Is it sort of out on the end? Where are we in Boulder where this shooting has happened?
It's a King Super that is pretty busy, especially around this time. We understand just from seeing that live stream, there were a lot of people inside the store, a lot of people out in the parking lot as well. It's not exactly in the middle of Boulder. It's kind of on the outside of Boulder, but it is definitely in Boulder proper. It took about 2-3 minutes for officers to get there. And then you've got several schools around the area, too. And so some of those schools had activities that were going on. Those activities were also put on lockdown. But right now, there are just people starting to gather on the outskirts of that pretty massive perimeter, just trying to hear anything they can about possible victims and about family members that they know may have been shopping inside that King Super there. So just a little while ago, we got a statement from King Super saying that their condolences were for the victims, but they deferred to the police for any information. Back to you.
Wow. All right. This is tragic, unfortunately, again. Thank you, Ari Melber, Jim Kavanaugh, and Gotti Schwartz.